All right, so we are live on YouTube now. Just go through and keep bringing people in, I guess, Hallie, as they come. Everybody can feel free to leave your video on or off. And we're going to go through and start with a couple of videos, which some of this may be repeat for some people. So you can kind of feel free to tune out too. Some of it is familiar. We have a mix of brand new people and people that have already been part of the conversation. If during the presentations you have questions that come to mind, you can feel free to put those in the chat as we're going, but then also at the end, we're gonna have, the second portion or the second hour is gonna be devoted to just conversation. So if you're concerned you might forget questions or you just prefer to write them, feel free to put those all in the chat. We're going to be, this is live on YouTube, and then also is going to be a document will be generated that records all of the comments and questions that everybody had. Some of those things we might be able to answer today. Bob's going to be joining us pretty soon here, the chair of the select board. So some of the stuff might be able to be answered today. Some questions or concerns or things we'll need to follow up. And the goal is Hallie, who's a student at College of the Atlantic, and then also a couple of watershed school students, are going to be helping us to develop a document with that sort of lists all of the questions and then gets responses to some of it as well. And that'll all be on the town on the town website and also the Midcoast Conservancy website. So without further ado here, actually, I'm going to start and do a second recording as well. And here we go. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Share sound. And start. So just to give everybody a brief overview of how we're going to do this, the goal is for this to be pretty much similar to what we did on Sunday. This is the second in a series of 3 opportunities, or probably there'll be a lot more than 3 in the long run, actually. 3 initial opportunities to just kind of ask any question that you want, any concern that's, any idea related at all to the Megunticook watershed. It's a good chance to, ask whether this issue or that issue applies to this at all. We're going to give a brief sort of medium level overview of the history of the conversation a little bit, how we got started, some of the grant funding we've received so far, what we've already learned, what we're still in the process of researching, and then kind of next steps. So the idea of this is to not be too restrictive and just sort of a kickoff for people to let us know what they're thinking and to help us craft kind of the approach going forward. I'm going to show a video that I made about the watershed with some help from some other people. Some things have changed since then. We've learned a lot more. It gives a little bit of an overview of part of what got this conversation started. Then Hallie Arno, who's a student at College of the Atlantic and also a graduate of the Watershed School, who's been involved in a lot of the climate reports and planning with the town. She is studying human ecology and river restoration and a variety of other things, and has a lot more expertise than I do, sort of from the science end of this. And she's going to give an introduction into kind of how some of the things that we're doing here fit into the larger context of the region. And we're also going to show a video produced by Midcoast Conservancy, which gives an example of another community or several other communities and the process that they've gone through to make some decisions on the Sheepspit River. We're going to talk about, Hallie's going to give an overview of what climate change means for the Midcoast and kind of some of what we know and what we should be planning for. And then I will do an overview of just the individual dams that we have in Camden and the grant funding that we've received and what stage we are in that process. So if any of this, and then at the end of there's sort of the open discussion, questions, comments, opportunity. So if any of that, if these videos are things that you've already seen, you can feel free to tune out for that part. But I know for some of you, it's gonna be new. I'm gonna start that now.
Growing up in Camden, I never thought much about the river that runs through our town. Other than the deep, slow-moving part known as Shirt Tail where we would swim, it wasn't of much use to me. It's hard to even track the river as it twists and turns and obscures itself under buildings, coming out different sizes and sometimes different colors as it winds its way to the harbor. But as it turns out, before Camden was known for its brick buildings and beautiful boats, people were drawn to the area for this small but mighty stream called Megunticook, and the whole town used to go by the same name. As soon as I joined the select board, I started having to make decisions about all kinds of things that I didn't understand. So I find I'm constantly asking questions like, what are we talking about? And why are we doing it? It didn't take long before dams came up on the agenda, and I began hearing about all the expenses that go along with them. They need to be inspected, insured, maintained, and adjusted. They cost the town hundreds of thousands of dollars, and so I got to work asking lots of questions about each one. Some of them serve the purpose of maintaining a desirable water level that is elevated for recreational purposes. But some of them, like the town-owned Montgomery Dam, where the river enters the harbor, are today basically aesthetic in their purpose. Wait, what? Since when is a concrete wall in the middle of a river considered beautiful? Okay, people like waterfalls, but it's not the kind of waterfall you see out in nature. It's more like a wildlife border wall that was built for a purpose it no longer serves. Back when water wheels were the main form of power, the dam forced water away from its natural course, which was through the Harbor Park Walkway, and into the basement of the Camden grist mill, and later to the textile mill and anchor factory on the public landing. Ingenious and purpose-filled at the time, but today it does no such thing, and instead creates a muddy bathtub that is blocking fish from accessing an entire watershed and depriving an entire ecosystem of an essential part of the food web. So while the dam itself may technically belong to the town of Camden, Camden Harbor and the Megunticook River are gateways that connect the Atlantic Ocean to an entire region that is shared by many. Most of us recognize the importance of migratory birds, but what I didn't realize is that migratory fish are actually just as important.
Every spring, the river fills with a type of fish called an alewife. Alewives, a kind of herring, are anadromous fish, which means they live in the ocean, but they migrate temporarily into fresh water to spawn.
When they return inland after years at sea, they help to complete a cycle that has sustained life for thousands of years, carrying nutrients from the sea back to the land, fertilizing the soil, and providing nourishment to everything from otters to ospreys. When dams are installed without fish passage, the natural cycle is broken. Not only are sea-run fish prevented from traveling upstream, but species such as native brook trout, which were once abundant, can't move up and down the river as temperatures and conditions change. These fish need cold, well-oxygenated water, with lots of rocky crevices to lay their eggs. When dams hold back water in impoundments, they also trap sediment that smothers the natural stream bottom that the fish depend on. Cold, rocky streams like Megunticook are slowed down, heated up, and transformed by layers and layers of mud. Megunticook River still has pockets of highly suitable habitat, but when fish tumble over our dams, they have no way of getting back. When fish can't spawn, they can't reproduce, and it didn't take long for the wild population to die out. But what about fish from the sea? Not being a fish expert, I started by listening to a few who promptly told me that they'd never heard of alewives trying to get past the dam in Camden Harbor. But soon I read a mention of alewives in the Camden Town meeting notes from 1806. Sure enough, once I recalibrated my eyes to read 200-year-old cursive, I could see that a request had indeed been made to examine whether the dam owners could be forced to open up sluiceways to allow for the passage of alewives and other fish from the harbor to what was called the large pond above Mullinose Mills. A committee was formed, and there was mention of petitioning the state legislature to compel the dam owners to comply, but it appears that nothing came of it in Camden. The first permanent settlers came to Megunticook Harbor in 1769 and got right to work leveraging the river's power by blasting bedrock, damming the flow, and molding the landscape in more ways than have been possible to properly document. The little stream that runs behind the middle school turned water wheels that powered the production of everything from flour, paper, and textiles to anchors, gravestones, and gunpowder. Yes, gunpowder. Right here in Camden. We don't use the river for power today, but we still need some of the dams to maintain deep water for swimming and boating, and in some places just to fill in for Mother Nature. For example, the two dams at the outlet of the lake that are now owned by the town of Camden used to be owned by the downtown mill owners who used them to regulate the amount of water that was sent downstream to their mills. In the late 1800s, when there was a drought and not enough water was flowing, they went so far as to blast the outlet of the lake so they could lower it below its natural limits. Eben Fernald and others living on the lake were furious, and they were even granted an injunction by the Maine Supreme Court. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this had all taken its toll, and by the late 1800s, a state law was passed banning fishing in the entire Megunticook watershed. One last effort to save dwindling native fish populations, and even that didn't work. At that point, though, they needed the river for everything from powering mills to washing sewage and sawdust out to sea. So shortly thereafter, the town seems to have given up on wild fish surviving in the lakes and streams on their own at all. A better idea was brewing nationwide. Why not bypass Mother Nature altogether and raise the fish in tanks and release them where we want them? The town requested a hatchery be funded by the state at the base of Megunticook Lake, and so began the tradition that continues today.
The numbers that are desirable by anglers wouldn't be as much if we didn't do our stocking. Favorite part of the job is seeing the expression on those folks' faces when they realize that the fishing all of a sudden just got way better. Stocking is a very important job. What we're doing is essentially giving Mother Nature a boost. We stock about 1.2 million fish a year. So we're creating that opportunity for folks to go out and have a real good chance of catching a fish. And that's what it's all about.
From a recreational fishery standpoint, the strategy worked, and fishing opportunities were greatly improved. But we never have succeeded in restoring the true biodiversity of the river that has given us so much.
After going to the Damariscotta fish ladder to look and see all of those fish going up, I came back to Camden, thought maybe I can find some. And the first day I didn't find any, but the second day, there were at least 100 that I could see with my eyes, alewives, trying to swim up to the dam. I mean, it was just the most exciting thing that has happened to me. We're realizing that these dams that we put in 200 years ago, because that was the only way for us to power our mills, the dams are still here, and we've gotten attached to the way they look in some cases, but they're blocking an entire ecosystem from doing what it was originally intended to do.
Now is the time to ask ourselves, what do we want Camden to be known for? We have peregrine falcons, osprey, bald eagles, and bobcats. But why do we need the state of Maine to raise our fish in hatcheries when we have dozens of miles of cold, rocky streams perfectly suited for the native populations that used to thrive here all on their own? I believe we should invest in a healthy river that attracts abundant wildlife, in a river that attracts tourists, not with a contrived concrete barricade and artificial waterfall, but a freely flowing river that tumbles over the natural ledge that exists there. What could be more beautiful than that? What could be more beautiful than the return of native fish runs and sustained wild brook trout populations to the Megunticook watershed? What if you could eat your ice cream and peer over this footbridge, not just at ducks and the occasional wayward hatchery fish, but at eagles and ospreys and thousands of native fish heading upstream to spawn? It's happening all across New England as towns, private landowners, and organizations are working to reconnect rivers and streams to the Atlantic Ocean. Fish are returning to places they haven't seen in hundreds of years, and the time is right to finish what the townspeople started here in Camden back in 1806.
If there is something we need, it's a leap of faith. A step away from the comfort zone and be a little brave. So take a look around you. How far can you see? How far do you think you can run? Standing on your knees. It's a beautiful world out there.
Okay, so if only everything were that easy. It's this is a conversation that is being had all across the country. We're not the only ones. There's a way to do it very badly and make lots of people upset and have it fail. I think our hope is that there's also a way to improve things that will be beneficial to the majority of residents of our town, the majority of visitors, and wildlife too. But it's going to take a lot of conversation and hopefully also a lot of learning from the way things have been done in a good way or a bad way or an effective way or an ineffective way in different places. And so Hallie's going to give us a little bit of context sort of about why there is so much funding available for this area, what has been happening in other places, and just how Camden, Megunticook watershed might fit into the larger regional conversation. Take it away, Hallie.
Awesome, thank you, Allison. Yeah, so my name is Hallie Arno. I am currently a student at College of the Atlantic. My major is human ecology, but I'm focusing a lot on river restoration and conservation and the relationships between humans and the rivers and the ocean. So that fits in really well with the project that we're working on here. So I'm going to give a quick presentation. Can everyone see the presentation? Great. And also feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions as we go. It would be great to have this as a conversation. And I'm I want to start with talking about the history of this area. We call Camden where the mountains meet the sea. And we talk about how the first Europeans came here because they, as Allison said in the video, they were attracted to all of the natural resources that would be supportive of life. But there are also indigenous people here before that, the Wabanaki, and this is the Penobscot Indian Nation seal. And as Allison said in the video, you might have caught that Megunticook was the name of the town, and that is roughly translated, depending on who you ask, to the great swells of the sea. So the fish in the river were really important, almost certainly to the life of the people that lived here, because it was food. The river could have been transportation, and Camden and the entire ecosystem probably looked fairly different, but that doesn't mean we can't get back to what it looked like then. And the fish in the river are still important, especially for tourism now, fishing in Lake Megunticook and on the river, although not as much as they could be. So that is something that I am really excited about, is bringing fish back. That's what I want to focus on. But I also want to talk about how with climate change and things, the environmental degradation happening in other areas, that will definitely and is currently affecting the Megunticook River watershed. So here is a graph of the temperatures in the Gulf of Maine. It's sea surface temperature, and this graph is set up a little bit different from a regular temperature graph, but it's different from the average temperature. So it's called the temperature anomaly graph. So here you can see between 2005 and 2015, the temperature went up quite a bit. So the Gulf of Maine is one of the fastest warming bodies of water in the world, which is really scary for a place like Maine that relies so much on our fisheries and our natural resources. So it's something that we need to keep an eye on, and we really need to work to mitigate some of these effects as much as possible. So that's where watershed restoration comes in. So one reason that fish need cool water is because of their life cycle. So a lot of them need cool, larger pools to survive, especially in the summer as it gets warmer. So these are some brook trout, which we do have in the Megunticook. We could have an increased population if it was easier for them to move up and down the river, and if there was more cool water habitat available for both breeding and just for survival on the hottest days of the summer. So warming water will very much affect these species, and that will have ramifications for the entire food chain. I also want to talk about the effects of pollution. So this is just a review. As we all know, with a watershed, every drop of water that lands in the watershed will eventually go into the river. So the Megunticook River watershed is pretty large. It goes into Lincolnville, a little bit of Appleton, I believe. I think Allison will show a picture soon. But something that we don't talk about very much, and that is very much related to the river project, is storm drains and runoff and pollution, and how that all will end up in the river. And I am going to connect this back to climate change. So just keep this in the back of your mind, and how pollution in the river will inevitably affect fish, especially things like lawn chemicals, which have a lot of toxins in them and are used quite a bit, road salt, things like that. And the reason that this is connected to climate change is because as the climate warms, we will have more rain events in Camden, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But we're going to get more precipitation, which means that there will be more runoff and more flooding, and this is just another thing stacked against the fish. And the effects just aren't just locally here in Camden. So in the ocean, a lot more fish are dying, and that is because of a variety of reasons, from things like fishing to ocean acidification to warming waters. So a lot of the fish that we're talking about, things like alewives or American eels, which the Elver fishery is really important to the economy. All of these fish have they're called anadromous, so their life cycles are both in the river and in the ocean. So that means if there's higher mortality in the ocean, for example, if they're caught from bycatch, or if they die because of warming or ocean acidification, to make up for it, for the population to stay intact and thriving, then what needs to happen is that there needs to be more reproduction and higher survival in the rivers when they're in that life stage, because a lot of these fish have a life stage where they breed in the rivers. So we can actually have an effect on the entire ocean ecosystem in this river because of that critical life stage. So having a healthy river means healthier ocean populations, and healthier river populations are necessary because there are problems in the ocean. So this all sounds great, but I want to really tie it back to the role of restoration in coastal resilience and resilience for these important species. So rivers, when they're flowing naturally, are better habitats for fish, and that's because these fish have evolved in these naturally flowing rivers. So things like vegetation along the shores provide shade. So if there are trees and bushes along the shores in a more natural habitat, a less built up habitat, that means that the water will be cooler, there'll be more nutrients in it. They'll also be cleaner. So that's one aspect of restoration that could be important for resilience, but also free flowing rivers are really important because free flowing water is cooler. Cooler water has more oxygen. So that means that when the water encounters a dam and it slows down, it'll warm up and it will be less suitable habitat for fish. And this will have ramifications for all the way up in the ecosystem: birds, mammals, humans that would eat the fish. Alewives are sometimes used as lobster bait. Elvers are sold for quite a bit of money. I also want to emphasize that we aren't the only ones doing this, and this is a statewide movement. The Penobscot has had some recent dam removals in the last 10 years. The Kennebec right now is going through a new management plan to try to increase fish passage. There's a conversation starting around the Royal River in Yarmouth. So this is happening all over the state, and the time to act is now, because there are a lot of resources, a lot of grants available, and it's a statewide conversation. So I think Allison has a video about another similar project, the sheepskit, that we can show.
Yeah, so this is a video that was produced by Midcoast Conservancy, which is a partnership that we've enlisted or created with between the town of Camden and environmental organizations, knowing that even though 4 of the dams along the Megunticook are owned by the town of Camden, but it's really not, the town of Camden isn't really in the position to be a scientific expert or, consultant in this area. So it was really important to us that we create a partnership with organizations that really do have the expertise and have had experience coming up with solutions and trying to do things in a science-based way. And here is just sort of one example of another community that has gone through a similar process. And
all rivers are important to me. This one is very important to me because I live on it.
Every drop of water that falls somewhere on land flows down into the river. And there's a story, and it's cyclical. And everybody has impact, and therefore we have responsibility. There's a Wabanaki prophecy that says that the new dawn it'll happen in the Dawnland. Wabanaki territory is the Dawnland.
What I think changed minds of people along the Sheepscot was the understanding that we really do have a national treasure here.
It's a small coastal river, but it's incredibly biodiverse. We have all 12 sea-run fish species in the river, which is rare.
We think immediately of Atlantic salmon. They're the king predator fish.
Rainbow smelt, sea-run brook trout, Atlantic sturgeon,
tomcod, short-nosed sturgeon. Okay, wait, let me try again.
Certainly the one we've been, so far at least, the most successful has been river herring, both bluebacks and alewives. But shad would have come up this river in massive numbers. Stripers are coming up now in pretty good numbers and picking off the young alewives.
The elvers are in this river. They have come back from the Sargasso Sea, and they will then go back.
And when we get more lampreys up this river, who spawn and then their bodies decompose and all of those nutrients go filtering down through the column, and the crayfish are there picking them off. And the bass are eating the crayfish, and the mink are eating the crayfish, and the otters are eating the crayfish. You know, it's all linked.
When mussels are larvae, when they're in their early life stage, they actually hook on to the gills of fish. And so they take a ride, and that's how they're able to disperse themselves.
If you think of a river like an artery, the fish are a lot like blood cells that carry the nutrients up and down the river.
So we are connected to everything. They're connected to each other as species. We're connected to the river as humans.
And I remember really clearly once standing on a bridge looking for my first alewife run. And I looked down in the water and there was nothing going on. You know, it was just black. And then all of a sudden one of the fish rolled. And I realized that what I was looking at was fish, bank to bank, top to bottom. That's what we're supposed to see.
People's first interest in the river was thinking of it as a source of food, secondly as a source of power, to run their grist mills and their fulling mills and their sawmills. It wasn't for 100 years or more that they realized that they were preventing a lot of fish from getting where they needed to go in order to have more fish.
My grandparents, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, they had not seen in their lifetime what this river was capable of.
There are a lot of towns like Whitefield that have old dams like this that were built a couple hundred years ago, and a lot of them are degrading.
The dam was leaking severely, and this time of year, with the low flow out of the river, our hydrant was out of water.
The town really didn't want to spend a lot of money fixing up the dam, and so it's like, so where do we go from there?
The partners really hosted a variety of meetings with the town, the community, with the select board, with the fire department, and we held these meetings monthly for a couple of years to really start from the bottom up. And we went in with no preconceived notion. We had the goal of reestablishing connectivity and creating fish passage, working through that process together to arrive at the solution that we all felt confident in was really the critical piece to making this project successful. Because Cooper's Mills Dam was a sought-after dam removal project for decades. I think timing was important, but also that the fact that we did start from the bottom and worked our way up.
There's a lot of questions, a lot of answers, and we finally put it all together and went to the townspeople and said, this is the best we're going to have, I think. Right. You know, the alternative was to let the dam fall down. Then we'd have nothing. We would have nothing. We would have a dry riverbed, or a riverbed like we see right now that had no way of getting water out of it.
Before the dam came out, Cooper's Mills always had a dry hydrant intake in the impoundment. So we designed in 2 pools to make sure they'd always have one here.
And that was the bottom line for the town. And leaving parts of the dam on the overlook so that there was that connection to the past and it wasn't just completely taken away.
Right. There was a lot of thought in that. I mean, the people that were developing this site took that all into consideration. They worked with that historical society too.
And they listened to the people in the village.
Yep.
For many years, this dam was really seen as a nuisance and it was extremely unsafe. And by improving the site and removing the unsafe assets, we were able to turn that on its head and able to allow people to now access the river.
We actually had a lot of fun over the last year of being on the edges of this massive construction project at the Head Tide Dam, because it didn't take out the whole dam as at the Cooper's Mills. It modified an existing dam. I used to walk down to the bottom of the hill here and look down into a pool where all the alewives had come all the way up from the ocean, ready to get all the way up to spawning ground, and they were just massed there because they couldn't go any further, because the water coming through the little holes in the dam was just too strong for them.
You know, there was no question there was lots of tension about the change that we were advocating for. And yet when we finally compromised and found a solution that'll allow fish to go upriver at least 90% of the days when they want to move.
They're going to run through there. I can't wait to see it. It's the most exciting thing. You're going to be able to stand on a platform and look down and watch them. Hopefully we'll see shad go through.
But that's actually why the grate that is at head tide is open like that, is to convince the shad that it's just branches up above and they won't be nervous about passing under there, because they have been notoriously nervous about concrete and so forth.
In the spring every year, I call it the Kevlar hatch. It's when all the kayaks and the canoes are high enough water to come down from Kings Mills and come through right to head tide. This year, they'll be able to go right on through. And so there's another migration that might be happening, some people. And part of this reconstruction project also provided a safe place for them to pull out, because it used to be a little dicey at times. Not only that, but there's a swimming hole here, which is the other reason I'm glad the dam stayed, because it scoured out a deep swimming hole that's been part of people that I know whose grandfathers lived here, who used to swim in that swimming hole. So we have preserved that for the kids, and for the adults too, for that matter.
My grandchildren have always swum in the river. A couple of them learned to swim there, in fact. They swim with a snapping turtle that's about 1.5 feet long. And every once in a while we see her. In fact, one year she came out of the river and up to my garden and laid her eggs in my beet row.
Those kinds of things, I think, anchor us. You know, they give our lives meaning, they give us context.
The river belongs to us all, and we all should be able to not only use it, but then if we do use it, we then learn to respect it.
We completed the project just 2 years ago, but the ecosystem is responding so strongly, and I could see it days after we breached the dam when we were able to remove the dam completely. I was able to watch juvenile alewife that had spawned in ponds upstream move down with ease. Within a year after removing the dam, we saw more Atlantic salmon reds above this area than we had ever seen before.
I think this restoration project is the kind of thing that can give young people hope, because you see, if you give nature a chance, she can come back in such a strong way.
It took a lot of people. It took a lot of imagination. It took a lot of effort, a lot of belief. There were many times that people were ready to give up. It took money. It will always take money. It'll always take people who care. And I think it's a work of a lifetime to be proud of.
Let's see here. Okay, stop here. All right. So that's just one example. Some similarities with us, some things are different. To the component of the Megunticook project that is not really present in every single other river restoration or fish passage project is the fact that climate change actually plays a really big role for us. And it's also in a lot of ways, it's fortuitous because it's what is making a lot of the funding available for us too. And so Hallie is going to give a little bit of an overview of some of the local impacts of climate change. It was the watershed school, actually, when Hallie was a student there. I think it was one of the first reports, maybe the first report specific to Camden that was ever given to the select board. This is before I was on the select board. And I remember seeing the pictures that they have of the Harbor Park benches partially submerged. And they had this graph of expected sea level rise and all these things we need to be careful about and start planning for. And I remember everybody was like, oh my, we all had sort of looked at climate change and sort of believed in it, I suppose, but there's sort of an expectation, I think, among some of us that somehow it was going to miss Camden. And so over the last 4 or 5 years, the Watershed School every year has done a climate change class and has presented the town of Camden with additional information and reports and suggestions for planning. So Hallie now has graduated and she's off at the College of the Atlantic, but she's going to give us a little bit of an overview of what we should be keeping in mind for climate change here in the Mid-Coast.
Yeah, definitely. So like Allison said, I really want to emphasize that climate change, people often ask, when is climate change going to happen? And it's happening right now. We're already seeing a lot of the effects and we're just going to continue to see them. And the science has proven that over and over. One thing that we're already seeing is an increase in precipitation. So here's a graph of annual precipitation every year. And you can see that it's going up. So we're going to see more of that, more large rain events, more storms as we're seeing today. And it's going to be especially concentrated where we are. So you can see the change in precipitation from 1961 to 2008. So this isn't a prediction, this is what has already happened. And Knox and Waldo County especially have already seen increased precipitation, and that trend, it looks like it is going to continue. So that means there will be more water in the river, more runoff. And we're seeing that in the lake as well. When there's more water, it's flooding, it's going into the road, and it's starting to cause problems sometimes. So you can see this is a problem. This is at the Knox Mills, one of the dams up there. It's not just a problem for the building owners, which it definitely is, but also bringing a lot of dirt and pollution into the river. So ecologically and economically, and for people, this is causing issues. We also see it here. A lot of these businesses are flooding, and a lot of this is happening because the dam is blocking water from flowing to the ocean. The other thing I wanted to touch on is sea level rise, and I know this seems like it might not be necessarily related to the watershed, but it actually is. So we know that the sea level is rising. It's already rising and it will continue to rise, and this is because of melting ice and thermal expansion in the water. So in Camden, we're going to see more sea level rise. We've probably all seen by now these pictures of the benches with sea level rise, and when the river is really flowing strongly after a big rain event, that is further going to exacerbate the issues. But also, we might lose some of this beach as the sea level rises towards the seawall, and this side of Harbor Park could look a lot like the public landing on the other side with just the seawall and no intertidal zone. which is really important for intertidal life and diversity. And also a lot of us, I'm sure, enjoy it. Kids play there. So one of the concerns about the project is that removing the dam means Harbor Park would look different, which it certainly would, but I also want to remind us all that Harbor Park is going to look different regardless of what we do. The ocean is rising and it'll be infringing on Harbor Park. So to make a more resilient coastline, we need to think about that in our planning. And that goes along well with the watershed planning project.
All right, thank you, Hallie. So to finish off the presentation portion of this, I'm basically going to go through an overview of the grant funding that we've received, the reasons why we received it, and sort of the stage that we're in, as well as just a basic overview of each of the dams and what they do. So just a little bit about the Megunticook River watershed. It includes 1,500-acre Megunticook Lake, which is sort of the prime possible habitat for alewives, which is a species that there's a lot of funding available for. The same fish that we see going up through Damascotta Mills, where people go and watch that. About 33 square miles. It's mostly made up of Camden and Lincolnville, but also a little bit of Hope and Searsmont. There are 7 dams total on the Megunticook River. None of them have any form of fish passage. And let's see here. The beginning of this recent round of conversations about river restoration started about 3 years ago when the Montgomery Dam repairs came up on the select board agenda. And so there was a little bit of money budgeted to repair some of the dam, and the bids came back too high. And we also got a bunch of feedback from people saying, hold on, why, what is the purpose of this dam? Why is the town doing this? You should look into it a little bit more. And I was very uninformed about dams at the time. And I think the whole select board and people that live here too, it's easy to get confused and sort of not know, okay, which one's the Montgomery Dam and which one's the Seabright Dam and what do they do? And different ones have different purposes. And so what we did is we had a study done just to basically look at some of the alternatives, what the impact of the dam was now, and what some of the options might be for restoring fish passage. What we found is that the study found that removal of the dam would significantly reduce the risk of flooding to buildings in the immediate vicinity, would reduce long-term operation costs and maintenance costs to the town. Currently, we employ a dam control agent who has to check each of the dams daily and often hourly during rain events. The Montgomery Dam, for instance, takes 2 people to operate. If we get a lot of rain at a time when, during the weekend or off hours, we're paying overtime. So we also found that it would provide the greatest opportunities for ecological restoration if we were to remove the dam. But it would also create the largest amount of change in one of the most beloved areas of Camden. And so a lot of the public input that we received said there was kind of a strong desire to understand more about the rest of the watershed, how the dams work together or don't work together, and the possibilities for fish passage throughout, and any concerns about sediment toxicity. People had a lot of questions about sort of the whole river and the whole watershed before wanting to move forward with any specific change. One of the things that was better understood through the study that we did is the part about flooding. And so this shows a FEMA flood map and properties that are in the flood zone. And this is what determines the type of flood insurance that you need. And you can see here, each of these sort of balloons are around different dams. And so the idea is that basically what we learned is that there's a lot of funding available for projects if they can reduce a community or a certain property's flood risk. And so we started looking into doing a study of more of the watershed. And this kind of shows, where's my cursor here? So this is around Main Street. This is the flood zone around the fire station and the Bagel Cafe building. Up here we have the Knox Mill, and then this is the Knowlton Street Dam. And so one of the things that's being studied now is trying to understand what effect the dams have on each of those properties in the surrounding area. Just a little more of that. And let's see. So what we did, we were successful in getting a $139,000 grant from the National Coastal Resilience Fund. And this was sort of designed to meet the need of understanding the rest of the watershed better. And the goal of this is to develop a comprehensive plan that the town can use to address the fish passage and watershed connectivity barriers, flooding hazards, vulnerable infrastructure, and degraded stream and wetland habitat in the watershed. This is not going to get us to the point where we can make any decision about any specific dam, but it's going to give the community a lot of answers to sort of better inform the conversation going forward. This here is an interesting thing. This is the cover of the town report from 2006. And this was not even a 100-year storm, but did an incredible amount of damage when we got a ton of rain within a short period of time. And the type of rain that really has an impact on Camden is it's not just the fact that total precipitation is going up, but it's also it's the amount of rain that we're receiving in a 24-hour period or 24 to 48-hour period. And it's this sort of steeply sloped watershed that we have that causes all of the water that's landing in Lincolnville or Hope or anywhere within the watershed ultimately has to pass through downtown Camden. And as development has increased and the amount of impervious surface increases, the total amount of water, even without an increase in precipitation, the total amount of water that we have to rapidly be able to channel to the ocean has increased. And then when you add to that an increase in extreme storms, it's puts us in a very high risk category, which is why we're eligible for so much funding. But at the same time, as much as we wanted to be able to say, okay, well, we're going to understand the entire watershed before we make any decisions about anything, we also realized that there are some urgent needs, especially with the seawall in Harbor Park. It is overtopping with much greater frequency than we had realized. It's really something like 4 to 8 times a month with varying levels of severity. And some of these granite blocks are getting closer to the point where they could present a real safety hazard. The backfilling behind the seawall is getting washed away, and it's presenting a lot of issues that may not be willing to wait for us. So that's just the sea level rise data. So in addition, this shows just a little bit more of the flooding. In addition to the larger watershed assessment grant that we received, we also applied for funding from the Maine Coastal Program and the Island Institute. We got $40,000 from the Maine Coastal Program and I think $10,000 from the Island Institute to basically take what we learned about take what we learned from the Montgomery Dam feasibility study and use that to do design and engineering for either full or partial removal of the Montgomery Dam and also reimagining of the seawall. And so the seawall there's really no way to do something to change that dam without also addressing the seawall, because they're very much intertwined. The Harbor Park, though, one sort of little complexity here, Harbor Park is really part of the library in a lot of ways and is under the control of the Library Board of Trustees. So but the town of Camden owns the Montgomery Dam, and the town of Camden and the library really are, kind of a cooperative entity, but the library does have its own board of trustees that makes decisions about Harbor Park. So in order to change anything here, if it affects Harbor Park, it also needs the support of the library board of trustees. And then, of course, anything that really happens in town at all requires the ultimate approval of voters. And so it's a tall order to come to something that could receive support from that that many stakeholders. Of course, we also have, this is probably the site that has the largest number of kind of intervening factors. We have private property owners here, businesses that actually own the land underneath their buildings. And so, but the town of Camden owns the dam, so it's a somewhat complex situation here. So what the funding from the coastal program is going to allow us to do is really understand the options for the seawall, where the ledge is, where the tide can be expected to go. And the idea is to come up with a design that would be ready for construction if voters and the select board and the library were able to get to a point where we could all support it. We have started conversations. They've done a lot of the background surveying, and now we've had a couple of meetings with the library board of trustees to try to craft the best approach for going forward with some concept designs and showing those to the community and getting public input and looking at a few different options. So that will be coming up. Moving back, this is going to be mostly what we're focusing on here is a larger look at the watershed. And so coastal resilience is a term that probably you're starting to hear thrown out a lot, but not everybody really knows what that means. There's a lot of funding available if your project kind of meets these coastal resilience goals. And so NOAA defines coastal resilience as the ability of a community to bounce back after hazardous events such as hurricanes, coastal storms, and flooding, rather than simply reacting to impacts. So, in 2006, when we had a lot of rain, the seawall actually fell down, and we used FEMA funding in order to be able to rebuild a portion of that. There's a real movement now to try to focus more on designing things to begin with that are designed to flood or designed to be resilient to flooding, rather than just simply rebuilding things after the fact. This just shows a quick little synopsis from NOAA about what they see as coastal resilience. Okay. So that's where a lot of our funding is coming from for the assessment, and where a lot of funding would likely come from if we were to move forward with some of these projects. The National Coastal Resilience Fund, where we're getting the larger assessment money from, is targeted toward things that will benefit coastal communities by reducing the impact of coastal flooding, improving water quality and recreational opportunities, and also things that benefit fish and wildlife by enhancing the ecological integrity and functionality of coastal and inland ecosystems. So a lot of what is focused on here is trying to do things that shorelines that are more like this and less like this wherever possible, and a lot of other things like that. So a broad just overview here of all of the different dams that are being assessed as part of this grant. The dams over here in yellow are the ones that are being looked at for possible removal. They're the ones that preliminary analysis have shown to elevate the flood hazard zone, and also act as fish passage barriers. So some of them are privately owned, some of them are owned by the town of Camden. No decision is being made as part of any of this, but there's a report that will come out that just gives more information about all the options. Then over here, the Seawright Dam and East and West Megunticook Lake dams, those are all owned by the town of Camden and are not candidates for removal, not being studied for removal. They all, the East and West dams, are responsible for the level of water in Megunticook Lake and Norton Pond. And so they're being looked at for options for fish passage around them, and also for opportunities to make them a little bit less costly to operate if possible. So then we have this is the Seawright Dam, and the Seawright Dam is what turns the river into an area where you can sort of boat and swim. It's responsible for the elevated water levels at Shirt Tail, for instance, and has an impact all the way back to about Mullineaux Road. So that's another one not being studied for removal. That would be fish passage around that. This just gives a little bit of hopefully some context for some of the problems that are being faced by the town of Camden and our dam control agent when we get rain. So the primary driver is the level of the lake. And we need to keep that within a certain range, and that range changes depending on the time of year. But it's important not to flood these camps. Not only is that, and of course it's not just camps on the lake, but the properties on the lake, and that stretches all the way to Lincolnville, where that has an impact. Not only is it bad for the properties, but also it's terrible for the septic systems and water quality. And so as the lake starts to come up, sometimes cannot come up very fast. And by opening up the dams at the lake in order to try to alleviate flooding for the properties there, it can put downtown Camden at risk. And so even with some of these dams open, like the Montgomery Dam, for instance, in this picture is open all the way, but it still is causing the water to rise above or near a lot of these buildings here. This is an example of a rain event that was on April 13th, 2020. So this is not the type of a storm that you see the FEMA flood maps based off of. This isn't, those are 100-year and 500-year storm events. This wasn't even considered a 10-year event, just kind of more like a normal thing lately. And so this is 105 Bog Bridge, clearly flooding. And then this is Rawson Ave, near the Rawson Ave Bridge, and then this is the Knowlton Street Dam here that's just getting completely flooded. So there's not a lot of, there's really nowhere else for the water to go but down through downtown Camden. So the other part of this, in addition to being eligible for a lot of funding because of the flood risk that we face, there is also the habitat restoration component of it. And because we have a river and a lake and the ocean, we're very lucky in Camden, we also have kind of like the golden combination of habitat opportunities too. So the possibility to restore sea run fish passage for alewives, there are like 12 different species of fish that could benefit potentially. And so that's a big part of it. And then also the trout, this is a picture of a trout that was probably stocked by Maine IF&W. And what we're seeing a lot is, these are all pictures that I've taken downtown in the harbor, sort of right at the base of the dam. And a lot of the fish that are in the river, they end up tumbling over the dams and then they get stuck in the harbor, which isn't the right habitat for them. And so if we had even just fishways around the dams, that would enable them to get sort of where they need to go. This is a seal that was chasing some river herring last summer. But then also, just so you can just quickly see the pictures of some of these dams to get a sense for them. This is the East and West Dam, owned by the town of Camden, originally built as a grist mill and a sawmill, was gifted to the town of Camden by the Megunticook Watershed Association. And we often work in conjunction with Lincolnville to develop agreements about what level the lake will be kept at different times of year and who's going to pay for costs. Then this is the Seawright Dam, which has been all kinds of things, from a paper mill, a woolen mill. It was also a hydroelectric dam. It no longer is, also owned by the town of Camden. That's a historic photo of Seawright. This is called a few different things. It's the dam that is behind the current Shepherd Storage Building on Mount Patty Street. It used to be the gunpowder mill. It's referred to as dam ruins on the FEMA flood maps. It's being evaluated to see if it's a full or a partial fish passage barrier. It's not operable anymore. It's also privately owned. This is an area of special interest because it's sort of characterized as degraded wetlands. This is part of the area that's impacted by the Knowlton Street Dam. So some of the dams have a very small area of influence, like the Montgomery Dam, for instance, raises the water level significantly right before Main Street, but then to a lesser degree, back to about where the Bagel Cafe is. The Knox Mill raises, that dam raises the water level only about up to Knowlton Street, but the Knowlton Street Dam here, that has an impact really almost all the way back to Rawson Ave. And it's also the area that the study is finding has kind of the most amount of trapped sediment, a large amount of invasive plants. It's also the area where we're having a lot of trouble figuring out where the river walk can go. And so part of what is being studied now is to see, okay, if we were to remove some sediment and possibly remove the dam, would that allow for a better channel to run through here, and then also increase the ability of this area to soak up water when we get a lot of rainfall, and then hopefully also find a pathway for the river walk around the wastewater treatment plant in middle school. This is an aerial view of the Knowlton Street Dam, which used to be an iron foundry, and again, all kinds of other things. Here's the Knox Mill Dam. both the Knowlton Street Dam and the Knox Mill Dam are privately owned. And then, of course, there's the Montgomery Dam. So over the summer, they did a lot of field investigations, surveyed the whole river. They did a significant amount of sediment testing because of the industrial heritage of many of these sites. The good thing that we found is that so far there have not been high levels of any major toxins of human health concern. We're finding it's basically the same levels of things as in the harbor. So they're still doing a few additional tests, but overall that looks pretty good. And then they're doing a lot of different flood modeling based on different scenarios. So they're about 75% done with that study. And then there'll be information presented to the public. There's certainly still an opportunity for public comment, and we're sharing all of the comments that come from this talk series with the Interfluve and Gartland Dorsey as well. So this is just kind of a fun photo, I think, of what the Knox Mill Dam looked like on the day that they did the assessment. I had personally never seen it opened before. And it was really kind of beautiful sort of seeing this natural waterfall going through here and the amount of real estate that was opened up. Also, these really interesting geological features that have been submerged for the majority of Camden's history. So that was really interesting. Yeah, so that is the end of my presentation, and going to just basically open it up for all kinds of questions and comments at this point. Hallie is going to do the moderating.
Yeah, I can call on people, keep the speakers list. Feel free to just raise your hand and wave and I should be able to see you, or use the raise hand feature in Zoom on the bottom. But Jeff, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, just a little background. I'm a local civil and environmental engineer. I actually engineered the site plan for the head tide dam removal. And it was quite an interesting project that site plan was engineered off of a sketch that was given to me that was developed over like years. And just from the sketch, we created the site plan. We reused a lot of the old mill to stabilize the banks, build the rocks, build the portage pass, the rock pass. It was very interesting process to deal with, because from an engineering point of view, it was really cookie cutter for me to take somebody's drawing of a sketch of what they wanted to see, turn into the site plan, and watch the guys take the dam down and just do it real quick. But there was a long period of time and community effort involved to get to that final design that I just quickly banged out. I'm just trying to say that these processes do not happen overnight. And Allison has been working so hard on this, and she's doing a great job. But if anybody's nervous about a dam coming down or something changing immediately, it just doesn't happen like that with this. So that's why it seems like to some people this is going too slow, and to other people they're worried. These processes take a long time and a lot of public participation. And I think Allison's doing a great job. And I would be happy to help in any way, shape, or form in the future. You know, if anybody has a sketch plan or anything, I can make a site plan pro bono, save the town money. But also, I think we have a project that could work in kind, Allison, in that Shirttail Point, that park there. We have an erosion, stream bank erosion problem there, that we're going to stabilize the bank to lessen the amount of sediment that's going into the river. But also we're proposing to move the parking lot up and away from the resource and then grass that area over. And then in my current design, I have a few trees around the parking lot to shade the parking lot better as well. And so in this current design that we want to improve the Shirttail Park, we would address climate control resiliency, lowering the sediment contribution to the river, temperature, nutrients. So I know that to get the funding we need to do more work on the river and fish passage, we need to do in-kind work as a town. And I really think that while Parks and Recreation does not have the funding available to complete the project that we need to get done this year, so it looks like it's going to next year's books, it is a project that I think, Allison, we could work as in-kind work and getting more funding. And I mean, it's shovel ready. We just don't have the money to do it.
Yeah, I just kind of I'm eager to talk to you a little bit more about that, because a lot that should even really be in the report that Interfluve does about the whole watershed and areas of concern. One of the areas of concern that has been mentioned is just sediment transport, and do we need to be concerned about having to dredge the harbor more often, or and so addressing all of those kinds of things is kind of exactly what we're trying to do right now. So I hadn't heard about the Churchill project until last night at the budget committee meeting, actually, and it's kind of like, oh, okay. And thank you, Jeff, for Jeff has done a lot of work for the town for free and provided advice and perspective, and a lot of the drone photos are from Jeff, and and also you're a Main Street business owner, so Jeff has like every perspective and expertise area, so we really appreciate having you involved, and thanks for coming today.
Oh, thanks. And if anybody wants to talk to me or ask me questions, come over to Once a Tree. I'm there sometimes, or somebody find me. But we're at Once a Tree, which is the old grist mill of the town on Montgomery Dam. So if you want to look at it real close, you can just sit on the porch and we can talk shop.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Next is Dylan. Good to see you here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Haley and Allison, for putting this on. It's really great to hear more about this project. So I actually come from a background, I'm originally from New Hampshire, and when I was there, I did a lot of work on different sort of restoration and ecosystem resiliency projects, both in Massachusetts and Maine, or Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Massachusetts was the Great March of Critical Concern, and then I did participate in a couple of projects on Great Bay. And just I think it's really important to understand that, like, yes, these projects take a while, but you're building something. Instead of putting more money into crumbling infrastructure, you're building something new that is going to sustain itself, and you have to look into the future. You have to think 50 years in advance, this will be standing, this will be a project that whatever happens with climate change, whatever happens with changing weather patterns, it will keep the businesses and the town of Camden from flooding. So I wanted to say thank you, and also hang in there. It takes a while. The town of Durham went through a similar thing with one of their projects at, it was a living shoreline project at Wagon Hill, and they finished it last year. And the difference, like, there was a lot of resistance just because it's expensive, but the difference is you now have a place that, like, you can admire the nature of the place, but also there's no longer water flooding half the park. And it's just wonderful to see the difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dylan. We have a question in the chat. Anita wants to know, why isn't the Seabright Dam spillway not passable by fish?
Well, Seabright, it almost, maybe the most ambitious of fish. Sometimes when I look at it, I think, oh, maybe a fish could get up there. Certainly eels can get up. The eels, the elvers, are even getting up around Montgomery Dam, and that's truly incredible to see them doing this vertical climb. But the spillway, I'll pull up a picture, maybe while some other people are asking questions, and we can come back to that. But if you look at it kind of carefully, it's pretty evident why the majority of fish can't get up there. It's also most likely going to be one of the easiest to create fish passage for, because there is already quite a lot of real estate available. And so everything we've heard so far is that should be a fairly easy one that would allow, at least the trout, for instance, that are already in the system to get back and forth between different sections of the river. So
could I speak to that just for a second, Allison? When we design fish passage, we're designing for the fish that are going to be passing. And a lot of times we'll look at burst speed. So like an alewife has a burst speed of X feet per second over this distance. So they can jump through hoops if need be of powerful water that are going at X feet per second, but only in short distances. And then they need to rest. Versus Seabright Dam, that spillway is just a long spillway. There's really no fish that have a burst speed that's 100 feet long and can get 20 feet up in the air. Even a salmon can't even pull that off, I don't think. So that's really what we're looking at, is burst speed per fish. And eels can climb vertically, apparently, which is legit because Allison saw it.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Lorna.
Hi, I work over on Main Street over at House of Logan, and just was reading on the town website about what was happening, what some of the ideas were, but I don't really understand what happens to the Megunticook River after it goes kind of under our pilings. What exactly happens to it before it goes over the dam or over that waterfall sort of thing?
right, yeah. And so I'll put a link in the chat to the Montgomery Dam feasibility study, which provides some pictures and really shows exactly what happens. But basically, it goes just underneath the Main Street bridge there. And by the time it gets to the House of Logan, it's already kind of ponding up. The impoundment has already started. And so the Montgomery Dam has an effect all the way back to where you are, which elevates the level. And then sometimes, I think you've probably seen, they'll open up the dam in order to allow for like painting or different things. And you can see the river gets a little bit lower there. And so that kind of shows the difference of how much the dam affects there. But basically it's just a river that goes underneath and then goes underneath the Smiling Cow and the businesses there. And but it's about 20 feet of water because, when the dam is closed up. So have you seen that feasibility study at all?
Yeah, I did. I know it went through a grist mill thing or something. So I just was trying to visualize what buildings it was under entirely. I know the Smiling Cow, Bagel Cafe, but I just wasn't quite understanding like how wide it is there. And I don't know.
Yeah, so originally it was the river would have kind of gone down through where the Harbor Park walkway is. But the dam was placed there to push the water over to like underneath Mariners. There used to be, and there still actually is, and Mariners and Once a Tree, there's like a water wheel that before it was used as a grist mill, but then there was a small hydropower project there. So it kind of forces the water down through the basements there and then over to the public landing side. It helps to, and I could put a bunch of pictures somewhere. It helps to see what it looks like underneath there when the dam is open. And then you can really kind of see what's going on. But yeah, it's confusing. When I first started looking at this and this came to the select board, it was like, hold on, what does this dam do? Where does the river go from here? Where does it go from there? And yeah, so that's a short answer.
Yeah, so if you take down the dam, it would go more to the left, kind of, but we'd still have to go under the road, obviously. So it'd be somewhat man controlled, if you will. So
yeah, it would go under the road, just like similar to the way that the river goes underneath Knowlton Street, or underneath Washington Street. But there are different, because the way that everything is developed, it's really developed around the river with the dam. And so trying to figure out, okay, does it make sense? Could the river go back over here, or is that no longer an option because of, the Harbor Park stairs? Or, what would we be willing to change and what would we not be willing to change? And so that's part of what we're trying to get to the point where we have some concept designs that we can show people, because it is really hard to visualize. Exactly. But essentially, if we didn't do anything else, it would take away part of Harbor, the Harbor Park walkway would need to be realigned or repositioned in one scenario.
The part that's flooding now,
The part that's already flooding from sea level rise. So, but then it would also create, more of an island in between Harbor Park and the public landing. So that's kind of the landscape design aspect of it, that there really isn't just one option for this. There are different ways that it could be done. There are different, full or partial removal. So yeah, that's going to be a challenging one, but maybe exciting too.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Meg, you're next.
Okay, hi. Allison, this is an amazing presentation. I've learned an awful lot just by watching this. I appreciate the man hours or the woman hours that have gone into putting this together. I can't even imagine it. And I have a lot of questions that I know don't have answers yet. But one of the things I did want to say first, that I've seen the picture of the back of our store a few times now. And the apron that's around the back of the store is lower than our basement flooring. So we haven't been flooded in the basement for years. It looks like we are on the outside, but we haven't been. And we used to be flooded always, every spring, when the runoff from the mountain was coming down. But since there's been more control because of the townspeople that have been controlling the dams, whenever there's an event coming up, a weather event, they have taken care of that. And so that's been great. And I guess one of the questions that I have and that will be going forward is when we have to do work underneath our buildings, and if the dam was removed and the gate is no longer there, I don't understand how we could get it down to no water underneath, so that for a couple of days, pilings could be replaced or whatever needed to be done to the buildings. So the maintenance of the buildings is of concern to me. And I just want to know if there's a way that there could be a gate still somewhere that could be raised up, and then the water could flow out and down through the sluiceway or not. And that's something that an engineer would have to show a drawing of or explain to me so that I could understand that. The other issue, I mean, you can answer that if you want, if you have an answer for that.
Sure, and I don't know, Jeff is the engineer, so he might be able to articulate it better than I can, but essentially, if the dam were removed, then it would be at the lower elevation all the time. And the question is whether full removal is an option or not, whether that could work into the design that's acceptable to everybody. But in much the same way that where the river flows under the bridge, the David Dickey's Bridge, it would just be lower all the time. But I don't know if Jeff has a better explanation for that.
Meg, you've seen it drained a number of times.
Yeah.
When it's drained, the river's flowing towards the spillway, or the sluice gate, I mean. Right. That level is essentially gonna be the level the river's gonna be at if the dam's removed completely. If it's partially removed, sorry, I have a tickle in my throat. If it's partially removed, it will be to that level that it's partially removed to. If it's left there, it's just gonna stay at the same level, and we're gonna have to work fish around the dam. So if we take the dam down, the river will naturally flow, and it will be down essentially between your building and the deli. And it won't, unless there was like a 25-year flood event, the river won't come up and go into the flood banks. So your buildings will be in the floodplain of the river, but the predominant flow won't touch your building. So you can take your piles and get some nice concrete or something in there and buffer it up that way. So that's really, I mean, it's not going to really change anything except for the river's just going to be at a nice flow, but it's going to be a lot lower, and it's not going to impede the buildings as much.
Okay, it'll be a lot lower, but it won't be as low as we may need it for maintenance and repair work.
No,
I don't, if the gate's not there, I just don't see how we get it down to the level that we might need it. And if there, if we are worrying, which we should be worrying about climate change and more and stronger rain events, how do we prevent then the flooding that might happen to our buildings if you don't have that sluiceway open or the ability to control the water coming down? These are all questions that, not being an engineer, I don't know how to figure it out for myself. So I guess I'd need to see something concrete that so I wouldn't have to worry about the condition of the buildings underneath.
Yeah, I believe. Oh, sorry.
No,
I believe sketches are being worked up for concepts of what it would look like if it's totally down, what the buildings would look like, vegetation, maybe even a boardwalk. I would love to see a boardwalk across the backside of those buildings.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is sketches being worked up for yourself and other business owners and stakeholders for what the end product could look like in the different scenarios.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, that's good. It's a relief to know that there's concern about that, as well as the excitement of the other things that could happen. And I love the idea of the fish ladders. I think it's great. I, as a voter in Camden, would need to know if this is the right place for them and what we would have to destroy or change or take away from our town in order to do that. And taking into account that the waterfall may not be all that important to maybe people that live here or whatever that have seen it all the time, but it's an icon of Camden. It's part of what brings people to Camden, and I think it's important. And I don't know if we'll have that, and I would like to be able to see plans before we have to actually vote on whether we want to do this. So I'm assuming that will happen.
Oh yeah, there's a long ways to go. One of the things, because it does, the library is concerned about some of the same things. I love history too, and the historic preservation aspect of things. And so even just to get to the point where it can be presented to voters, it has to have the full, or at least majority support of the library board of trustees. And so there's going to be a lot of talking that needs to happen. If we just remove the dam, currently you're right, there wouldn't be a waterfall on the public landing side. And so that's, one of the things. Is that acceptable or isn't it? Are there a variety of different things we could do to create a water feature there, or have full or partial removal? There are other communities that have dealt with it by actually having a recirculating water feature with some historical signage for just a part of it, but then it doesn't involve the river. It, you know, just lets the river bypass. Tyler Smith has come up with all kinds of like ideas about different, you know, different things that could be done there. But you're right that, I mean, I've sat down there tons too and seen there are a lot of people that go and I have their picture taken there, and it's definitely special. And the task is to see is there a way that we could design it so that there would be enough new stuff maybe that was enhanced and also special that it would offset that, or do we need to, you know, find other ways of preserving it, or but absolutely I'm sure it'll be multiple rounds of designs shown, and everybody will get a chance to vote on it too.
That's great. The other thing was, as I think about the really horrendous problem of sea level rise and what towns that live on the coast are going to be able to do about that, I see the public landing as being such right at the forefront of the concern. And I'm wondering how the dam, are you taking that into account too? Is that part of the whole, or are you just concentrating right now on the dam part of it and not the public landing and how it's affected by all of this?
Yeah, so we did have a report. We're part of this Penobscot Bay Resiliency Project where they looked at 10, I think it was 10 different towns and harbors in the Penobscot Bay area, and did an assessment of our infrastructure, what they recommended that long-term we should, anything that gets replaced should be planning for about 1.5 to 2 feet of sea level rise. And so we've done some on that. Most of it can be done really separately from the dam. It's not, for the public landing side, decisions made about the dam don't impact that as much unless we want to get into talking about, you know, some kind of connecting boardwalk, or, you know, reigniting the conversation about a bridge that has haunted Camden in the past. Yeah, that, because we maybe have a little bit longer there, we've just been in sort of the assessment phase of that, and it's sort of seen as a different project. But you're right, it's definitely critical. Steve Pixley's been screaming about the fact that you know, he can't keep replacing that. Doesn't really make sense to keep replacing that boardwalk because it's just you know, I mean, you've seen some of the different planning that's happened before with the T.Y. Lin stuff. And so the idea right now is to kind of, even the T.Y. Lin plans didn't totally address sea level rise all that well. And so we're trying to now see what maybe could be salvaged from the T.Y. Lin plans. And then it's basically going to require applying for another grant and doing another round of it. But
I would like to see an organization do as much work as you and your helpers have done with this on the public landing. I mean, I'd like to think that that is a top priority for them as well. So, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for those points, Meg. Are there any other questions, comments? This is really an open space to share concerns or ideas. Ask questions. Anita brought up a point in the chat about bridges and liking that concept.
You want to just maybe read that for any, I think for anybody watching on the YouTube channel, they're not going to see what comes up in the chat. So if you just read those comments, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. So Anita said, I think beautifully designed bridges between the public landing and the harbor park via islands would become a beloved and photographed feature. I also love the concept of a summer operating ground level fountain on the redesigned public landing.
I've always kind of felt like we have so much history there. And when you go to, you see this beautiful stuff, the waterfall and the harbor and these buildings. And it's kind of, people ask me a lot of questions about like, well, what is this? And what's going on here? It would be nice if you could go there and you could actually learn something about the history as well. And have, some signage that says, this was the first grist mill in the area. And this is, whether we end up leaving the dam or taking it out or changing it, it would be nice to say, this is why the dam was built and this is what it did. And maybe even, I'd love to see like a water wheel there or something that actually educated people about, this is how a grist mill works, or this is how, water power worked. There are a couple other places that have turned these like recirculating things into, a cool historical educational feature. But we don't want it to look like an amusement park either. So it's a kind of a balance. The
Lorna
would of course be powered by the pressure head from the elevation difference.
For a water feature. Yeah, Lorna, go ahead.
Sorry. So I was wondering, so it's going to take a while, obviously, to kind of come to any kind of a community agreement on, the Montgomery Dam. It seems like it's pretty complicated, partial, full, and what it might look like and all that. So I'm wondering, with the problems with the seawall, like how are those? And I'm just so, because I haven't mentioned my opinion, which is I'm all for resiliency, and I think it's really important. I'm really worried about sea level rise and the stormwater and all that issues. But so with the problem with the lower Harbor Park, and how when the water is really coming fast, it kind of blasts against the wall there and floods the benches and all that area, and it's degrading. I know there was a temporary fix done, but I'm just wondering, like, is that more of a shorter, sounded like that was more like a little bit going to be addressed sooner, like that's more urgent and can't really wait for the whole fish passage possible dam partial removal or full removal thing to be figured out. What's going forward with that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think what we're doing right now is trying to explore the option of creating a design that we know would be highly likely to receive outside funding. If the town were to want to move fast, if we could, say a miracle happens, or maybe it wouldn't take a miracle, but say we, the deadline for this grant that we have right now with the Maine Coastal Program for design and engineering is in June. And so we're going to have some kind of design that would, work, that's fairly close. And that's going to have to be presented to the Maine Coastal Program. What we're doing right now, working with the library and trying to get input, and we're having Gartley and Dorsey do structural evaluations. Shri from Midcoast Conservancy is going to be doing some more talking with business owners. We are going to end up with a design that not only addresses the removal of the dam or the partial removal of the dam, but also seawall options. And that's been sort of this talking with the library. It's possible that that might be acceptable to the majority of Camden residents, and that if we also at the same time feel that in, say a year and a half, we would be ready to actually make those changes and we could get a grant to fund the whole thing. We want to be in a position where that option is available. But so that it could happen more quickly, but it's also possible that people look at it and through conversations that we have and community input, it's decided that nope, we're not quite there. We'd rather put some taxpayer money into patching this or that to get us to the point where we can continue to have a conversation about what will work for the long term. So the thing about the grant funding that we're receiving, it does not give us money to design solutions that are not the sort of recommended solutions from a scientific resiliency standpoint. We don't have funding right now to design raising the Harbor Park seawall and build, with just more concrete and backfilling more, and then building a technical fishway with concrete that's going to have to be maintained, with taxpayer money. That kind of a solution doesn't have the funding options available that full dam removal or less engineered solutions would have. And so we can start exploring some of those other options if we can't get to a place where sort of the first recommended options from organizations like the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and NOAA are acceptable. I hope, does that make sense, kind of?
Yeah, really? So you're saying this June, there has to be something that voters agree on, or no?
Oh, no. Just something that can be, that is presented to designs that can be shown to people. No, yeah, but no, that would, we have to, that's the end of our period of performance for the grant. So the engineers have to have done all of their work. It doesn't need to be necessarily the final thing, but it needs to be pretty close. We need to know, have basically one.
And this is based on just the Montgomery study or the whole river study?
That's just the Montgomery portion of it. And it was, a little bit ambitious, but because the funding is available, and because there is a chance that, if that seawall falls down, or we start to get reports saying that it's only going to last, another year and a half or another 2 years, then it's not going to work to start then. So if we have designs that are, at least possible from an engineering standpoint, and 3/4 of the way, or maybe even all the way there, to kind of acceptable to the public, then we're closer than, if we just start from a reactive.
So this grant that you have that you're using right now, it's up to like designing drawings, plans, and stuff that you can present to people, like options that you can present to people, and you want to kind of have that developed by June. Is that the idea?
Yes.
Okay.
And one of the things that we had to work out with the library was, do they want to try to include the whole seawall in this grant, or did they want to try to do everything separately? As you've heard, library controls Harbor Park, and it might be that they just wanted to, fundraise for their own type of project. And if they were to say they're committed to keeping the seawall, all the way to the American Boathouse exactly as it is, then we would have had to say, all right, we're not going to include design for the seawall in this grant that we just got for, the Montgomery Dam. But they said, no, we do think it's important to, plan for, this possibility, and we understand that sea level rise is going to affect, the seawall, and that some things might have to change. That doesn't mean anybody's agreed to anything. It's just more like, they want to participate with us. And
well, thank you very much. That really helps me understand where we are. So I appreciate that. And thanks also for all your work you've done. It's just incredible. You're just such a huge asset to our community. And so is the Watershed School, and all of you guys too. It's just, we're so lucky, because it's so great to be in a position where we can all see what's happening with the flooding and stuff, and to be in a position to actually move towards doing something kind of thoughtful about it. It's just, with another government, it might not be, we very easily might be in a very different position. So I appreciate it for your work.
Well, thank you. It's been actually really fun to kind of see the town in a new light. I never paid much attention to even just the harbor. There's just a lot of exciting stuff going down there.
Thank you, Lorna. Jeff Scott, did you have a comment, question?
Thanks, Hallie. Lorna, and I echo what Lorna said and Meg said, just great information to your whole team. I'm always learning stuff. Moving sort of to the bigger picture, and perhaps it relates to the conversation about funding down by the lower dam too. I was reading with interest when you flashed up on the screen the National Coastal Resilience Fund, which says that they fund things that benefit coastal communities by improving water quality and recreational opportunities.
I thought you might like that.
And so when you mention that, what's the definition of recreational opportunities? Is that repurposing the walk along the dam or a dam, or moving further up? What I'm thinking about is the sediment area by the middle school and all that. And there are no recreational opportunities there because there's no access because of how terrible the situation is there. So it might be a way to incorporate some future access via the Riverwalk through there and put those in your designs for the town to consider.
Yeah, so as part of the broader watershed feasibility study, moving away from the focus of Montgomery, one of the things that we're tasked with is that they are supposed to choose 2 sites that are sort of the best candidates for a possible project, and then very preliminary concept designs are supposed to be done for those sites. And so we've already tried to make it pretty clear that it's looking like that whole section there that you're speaking of that goes behind the wastewater treatment plant and then the middle school is probably a really high priority for the town. It's a dam that's impacted by a dam that is privately owned. So I think we have a pretty good relationship there, though if we were able to find a good funding source. But that is, the opportunity there is really good for the whole watershed too, because of the sort of wetland regeneration possibilities. So the idea of the grant is to identify ways that we can naturally soak up stormwater in a better way. And what the dam does there is that it takes away some of that opportunity, because it's like having a flooded bathtub basically all the time. If you leave your bathtub full all the time and then you turn on the shower, the chances of flooding your bathroom are much higher than if you let the bathtub, let the drain be open and let it go through, and then you can turn on the water really fast and it'll expand and then ultimately get through the drain. So that's kind of like what that 8 acres is like back there. And if we, the natural channel should be a little bit different. And so even though, basically what you're saying is exactly what the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation does, is that increasing recreational opportunities like that, if it meant, okay, in addition to, we're going to remove the dam and that's going to benefit fish, but then we're also going to create an elevated, boardwalk maybe over part of it so that people could see, what a thriving wetland looks like. And then over here, we're going to have, a trail for bikes to allow, it's really a lot of it is the whole vision of the Riverwalk, which is, I think even in that, I read that Riverwalk master plan that you guys did however many years ago. And it said that part of the idea was to get people more interested in the river and the health of the river. And if you let people get close to it, they take better care of it because they pay attention. And for me, I know that has worked. I thought the idea of the Riverwalk was, back before I was involved in town government, it's always seemed like kind of a pipe dream to me. Like, how are they ever going to do that? and you guys have just chipped away at it. And slowly, years later, I'm coming back and I'm like, oh, look, I'm walking along the tannery site and looking, and I've learned so much by the, just the ability to get close to the river and monitor it. So I think it's like the master plan is working. And I think it's really unfortunate that the Riverwalk now stops. You get to town property and you hit a chain link fence. I mean, you managed to.
We're working on that, Allison.
Right. I mean, it's getting better. It's getting better, but it's really exciting and sort of like that long-term vision. None of it is work. It's working, and it's because of you and people like you. So.
Well, the town has spoken in support of it too, the community, which really, really helps. It's like moving a flywheel along. It just slowly moves, and then someday we hope it'll move a little more quickly. The other thing that worked really well in some of the grants that we've applied for is to tie in access to fishing in a strange sort of way. Fish and Wildlife really likes that a lot. I don't know, that's not what they're called anymore, but they like it for anglers to be able to have access, which gives you more points on your grant apps.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, I highly recommend stopping by the town of Alna's Head Tide Dam. When we did that project, we put in portage paths for canoers and kayakers to put in and put out on both sides of it. We have pedestrian paths all through it. And it was and we have that platform that goes over the river for anglers and just people to pass by and look at the fish come up. And that was hands down. I mean, that was all grant funding, but it had all those parts and components to it that you're speaking of, that we could, if we had a footpath and, stuff for them to fish off of and, portage points, that wins hands down.
Yeah, it was cool. It is cool. Yeah, I was like so excited, twitching in my seat when I'm watching that stuff. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like we only have a couple minutes left, but are there any last minute questions or thoughts? Can also email any thoughts you have to Allison.
Oh, also just one quick thing for people that want to, we didn't have people register for this webinar, and so we haven't gotten email addresses, but there is a place you can go now to sign up for updates. One of the things that the town of Camden doesn't always do as well as we could is communication. And so Midcoast Conservancy is going to be helping us on that, but they've set up a page on their website. And also, the idea is that all of these videos will be posted there too. Right now, they're also on the Camden Town website, but you can sign up for any kind of update about the Megunticook project by going to the Midcoast Conservancy website. And that link is available on the Town of Camden page. Where am I here? Let's stop sharing screen. The Town of Camden website does have a little thing on the front page that was advertising these talks. We're going to do another one of these talks on, Wednesday from 10 to 12. And then, but you can sign up for more updates by going to the Midcoast Conservancy. I'll put it in here actually as well.
Yeah, just put it in the chat.
Yeah, I just put it there. Yeah, you both did. And Allison, I think your may be a little better next week because there's 900 customers without power in Camden today.
Oh.
Yes. So anyway, that's apologize for being late. That was part of it. But yeah, it's pretty pervasive from about where we sit up towards the north.
Yeah, we've been blinking.
Yeah.
Over here.
Just FYI.
Back on, but it was off this morning.
Did you want to say anything, Bob, or?
I think
That
the,
comes after.
well, yeah, it's just 2 seconds worth. I think the questions we had in the last one are very similar in terms of people's high interest in what's going on and how fast too, because we do have things we need to get done. And I think one of the things I would reinforce that a number of you mentioned is the need for visual plans, ideas of work options we have going forward. And I know Allison and the whole team are very, very cognizant of that. And because it's nice to talk, and Jeff and I, and to both Jeffs and I, and Allison can talk technical to return blue and kind of get it. But in reality, to get most people to understand, you have to see something. And that's what's forthcoming very, very quickly. It's a high priority. Also, obviously you've already heard this initiative, I'll call it, in total is very large. It has to be because of the tentacles of starting with a problem with what do we do with Montgomery. Next thing you know, we're talking about a sediment, and in the town we are responsible, in my opinion, our opinion, to evaluate and provide the voting public what options are available. And that's how this tentacle got bigger and bigger, and it's evolved into a phenomenally great projects from river resiliency to fish thing to dams, and yes, our precious harbor and what we do with the seawall, what we do with landing, et cetera, et cetera. It's very exciting, but it's going to be more exciting very soon. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. This recording is, I'm getting a bunch of messages actually from people who don't have power that are wanting to be able to tune back in. So it should be available on the town YouTube channel right away. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
See you soon.